May 5th, 1945. High atop a granite hill some 20 kilometers from Linz, a heavy silence hangs over the walls of a gray fortress. Behind those walls, thousands of skeletal figures wait, not knowing whether that day will bring death or something else. In the distance, the sound of engines can be heard. They are not SS trucks. They are American tanks. When soldiers of the U.S. 11th Armored Division pass through the main gate of Mauthausen, the stench of lifeless bodies and damp clothing hits them like a wall. Many have fought in Normandy, in the Ardennes, in the Ruhr. They believe they have seen everything. But nothing has prepared them for this place. Piles of corpses stacked beside the crematorium, men who can barely remain standing, overcrowded barracks where every movement is an effort. Before them rises the fortress of the camp, with its stone walls, its watchtowers, and its electrified barbed wire. Mauthausen is different from many other camps. It is not a transit point, nor merely a site of forced labor. Since early 1941, the Nazi authorities have classified it as a no-return camp. In practice, that means something brutally simple. Those sent here are not meant to leave alive. Of the roughly 200,000 people deported to the Mauthausen complex and its sub-camps, an estimated 120,000 died. But Mauthausen is not only a fortress of stone, it is the center of a system. A web of quarries, underground factories, satellite camps, and external killing centers that turn the landscape of Upper Austria into an enormous machine of exploitation and death. Here, Hitler's dream of monumental architecture, the SS's economic greed, the development of high-technology weapons, and a daily violence that turns every day into a struggle to survive a few more hours all converge. This documentary goes inside that system. From the construction of the camp on a granite-rich hill, to the quarries where prisoners haul stones up the stairway of death. From the underground tunnels where jet fighters and missiles are assembled to the basements of the bunker, where a small gas chamber stands. From the photographs taken by the SS and secretly rescued by Spanish prisoners, to the great escape of Soviet officers and the manhunt it unleashes among the local population. What is uncovered at Mauthausen is not only the open brutality of direct murder, but also a system's capacity to fold crime into routine. Work, count, wait, die. A place where the stone of the quarries, the engineers' blueprints, and the lives of the deportees form part of the same equation. The Mauthausen death system. Mauthausen rises in the heart of Austria, about 150 kilometers west of Vienna, near the course of the Danube. The region has a feature that makes it an ideal target for the Third Reich: enormous granite reserves. Since the 18th century, the towns of the area have lived off their quarries. When Hitler comes to power, that granite takes on a new meaning. It becomes part of his dream of transforming Europe's urban landscape into a series of monumental cities with colossal avenues and gigantic buildings. In the late 1930s, Hitler and his architects designed megalomaniacal projects for several Führer cities: Berlin, Hamburg, Nuremberg, Munich, and Linz, his adopted city in Austria. To build those structures, millions of stone blocks are needed. The head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, immediately sees the opportunity. The quarries can be supplied with enslaved labor drawn from concentration camps. Death and architecture can march together. In August 1938, just a few months after Austria's annexation into the Reich, construction of the Mauthausen camp begins. The location is calculated: a hill overlooking the town and the main quarry, known as Wiener Graben. The first structures are simple: some prisoner barracks, administrative buildings for the SS, and the perimeter of barbed wire and stone walls that give the camp the look of a medieval fortress. But that is only the beginning. In the years that follow, the compound expands without pause until it covers roughly 15 hectares. The very first deportees are, for the most part, German and Austrian political opponents, as well as common prisoners deemed asocial. Then come Czechs, Poles, Yugoslavs, Soviets, French, Italians, Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, and women and men persecuted for their sexual orientation or for belonging to certain minorities. In total, prisoners from more than 40 different countries pass through the Mauthausen system and its sub-camps. Admission to the camp follows a ritual of dehumanization repeated thousands of times. New arrivals climb down from cattle cars after days of travel with barely any water or food. Many are dizzy, dehydrated, covered in filth. The moment they cross the iron gate bearing the eagle and the swastika, they are driven into a large room with communal showers. There, under the shouts of capos and SS men, they must strip completely. Hair is cut, bodies are shaved, teeth and skin are inspected. The shower is not an act of hygiene or relief after the journey. The water runs ice cold or scalding, depending on the guard's whim, and it serves to humiliate, disorient, and mark the beginning of obedience. When they come out, each prisoner is given a number and a striped uniform. The number replaces the name. From that moment on, identity is reduced to a figure sewn onto the chest. The newcomers are isolated for weeks in the quarantine zone, a part of the camp separated from the rest. Officially, it is meant to prevent contagion. In practice, quarantine functions as a concentrated rehearsal of what life in Mauthausen will be. Shouting, beatings, hunger, sleepless nights, pointless labor. It is a lesson in surrender. When they are finally moved into the open part of the camp, the prisoners encounter the real stage of their new existence. The main compound is surrounded by high granite walls and several rows of electrified barbed wire. On the corners, guard towers with searchlights and machine guns monitor every movement. Inside are rows of wooden barracks, long rectangles about 40 meters in length that, in theory, are designed to house around 300 people. In practice, in some periods as many as 2,000 deportees are crammed into them. 3-tier bunks, mattresses stuffed with filthy straw, windows almost always shut, a constant smell of sweat, disease, and damp clothing. Hunger is part of the camp's structure as surely as the granite walls. The daily ration is around 1,500 calories, roughly 2/3 of what is needed to stay alive under normal conditions. Here, the situation is far worse. The labor is exhausting, the winter climate is freezing, and the body has no time to recover. Dark bread, a little margarine, a watery soup with scraps of potato or cabbage. Many prisoners remember hunger as the most persistent torture. There is no moment of the day when the stomach does not ache. To that constant hunger are added lack of sleep and a violence that runs through everything. The most banal routine, the morning and evening roll call, food distribution, lines for the washroom, becomes an occasion for blows, insults, humiliations. The parade ground, at the center of the camp, is the stage for exemplary punishments. There, prisoners stand for hours, motionless, in rain or snow, while the SS count again and again, verify numbers, correct errors. Any deviation, a line out of alignment, a step taken too soon, can lead to a beating or something worse. On one of the walls of the square hangs an iron chain. Whoever is tied to it is suspended by the wrists, shoulders forced upward, and the body stretched into an impossible position. Sometimes that is the entire sentence. To hang there, until unconsciousness. Other times, the decision is simpler. The prisoner is left there until he dies. No official record is needed. The body is removed and the number is struck from the list. And yet the symbolic center of Mauthausen is not the barracks or the square, but a little lower down, beyond the walls and the wire, in the granite quarry. From the fortress, one can see the enormous gash carved into the rock, a cut more than a kilometer long and more than 100 meters deep. Each day, between 1,000 and 4,000 prisoners descend along a side path to work there. Some drill the rock with pneumatic drills. Others haul cut blocks. Everyone knows the quarry is a destination from which few return unscathed. The main access from the quarry back up to the camp is a steep staircase made up of 186 stone steps. Upon it is written one of the best-known images of Mauthausen's horror. Prisoners carry granite blocks that can weigh 30, 40, even 50 kilograms. They balance them on their shoulders or backs, gripping them as best they can with numb hands. They must climb the steps at a run while capos beat them with sticks and rods. If someone stumbles, if a block slips, it drags down those behind. A fall can trigger a chain of bodies tumbling down the stairs, breaking bones, crushing ribs, killing several at once. At the highest point of the quarry stands a sheer vertical cliff. There, the SS have devised a macabre game known as the parachutist's wall. From time to time, they bring a group of prisoners to the edge and offer them two choices: jump of their own accord or be beaten to death on the spot. Some resist. Others, exhausted and without hope, let themselves fall into the void. The bodies smash against the rocks below. From the top of the camp, the screams and the dull impacts can be heard. For the guards, it is all part of the work. The quarry does not only supply stone for the Reich's architectural projects, it also feeds the expansion of the camp itself. Many of Mauthausen's buildings are erected with blocks extracted by the deportees, who thus take part, without any possibility of refusal, in the growth of the fortress that imprisons them. Labor and extermination method fuse into a single space. Meanwhile, inside the main camp, the SS curate their own image. As in other parts of the camp system, there is a small photographic laboratory. There, portraits of new arrivals are taken for their identification files, and scenes of daily life are recorded for administrative and propagandistic purposes. Prisoners lined up in front of the barracks, groups working in the quarry, official visits by high authorities. In those carefully selected images, one sees orderly ranks, clean uniforms, an atmosphere of rigid discipline, but seemingly without extreme violence. But behind that photographic facade lies another reality the authorities want to conceal. From 1943 onward, when the war begins to turn against the Third Reich, Berlin orders much of the incriminating documentation destroyed. Negatives, reports, execution lists, anything that could serve as proof of the crime must disappear. Several specialized prisoners work in the Mauthausen laboratory, among them Spanish Republicans deported after the Spanish Civil War. One of them, Francisco Boyce, understands the historical value of those images. Along with other comrades, he begins to hide certain negatives. The selected photographs are first concealed within the camp itself, in corners accessible during outdoor work details. Later, with the help of neighbors opposed to the regime, they are moved outside the compound. Packets of negatives are placed between stones in a wall at the home of an Austrian woman, Anna Pointner, who accepts the risk of arrest if the Nazis discover the hiding place. Thanks to that chain of anonymous hands, several hundred photographs survive the war and become, years later, crucial evidence at the Nuremberg trials. While the SS try to erase the visual trace of their crimes, a more direct form of killing unfolds in another building of the camp. In the lower part of the fortress, near the entrance, stands the so-called bunker. On the upper floor are small cells where prisoners deemed especially dangerous are confined, political leaders, members of the resistance, captured officers. There they are tortured and interrogated for days or weeks before their final fate is decided. In the basement of the bunker, the building's darkest function is concentrated. Several rooms are connected by a narrow corridor. Prisoners who are taken down there follow a fixed route. First a room in which they are examined, then another space where they are ordered to undress, and finally a metal door with a small peephole that leads into a tiled room that at first glance looks like a shower. The ceiling is low, the walls are covered with tiles. There are no benches or towel hooks. When the door is shut from the outside, the room becomes a gas chamber. At Mauthausen, Zyklon B gas is used, introduced from an adjoining room through a ventilation system. Once the toxic agent is released, the air in the chamber becomes unbreathable within minutes. Later testimonies speak of 5 to 15 minutes until all those locked inside are dead. Through the door's peephole, an SS man watches the agony. When everything falls silent, a vent is opened to purge the gas, and after some time, the room is opened again. The bodies are then moved to other basement rooms, a cold chamber where they are piled for hours, a dissection room where gold teeth, prosthetics, and hidden valuables are removed, and finally, the crematorium. The ovens operate almost without pause. It is estimated that during peak periods, between 150 and 200 corpses can be incinerated in a single day. The resulting ashes are treated as meaningless waste, used to fill in roads, level ground, or dumped into landfills and nearby rivers. But even the bunker and the quarry are not enough to grasp the full scale of the Mauthausen system. A few kilometers from the main camp, to the west, stands another key site, the Gusen sub-camp. At first, Mauthausen prisoners walk the distance between the fortress and the Gusen quarry under SS escort. It is a daily round trip that drains strength even before the work begins. Soon, those in charge decide it is more efficient to establish a permanent camp next to the quarry. Gusen becomes a reality in 1940, with its own wire, barracks, and command system. As the war progresses, Gusen grows even faster than the main camp. By late 1941, the number of prisoners there exceeds that of Mauthausen. Among the deportees, a bitter saying circulates: anyone transferred to Gusen has lost an extra life. If conditions in Mauthausen are deadly, in Gusen they are even more so. The subcamp operates under the authority of an SS commander, remembered by survivors as the Devil of Gusen, a man whose violence does not end when his shift does. His own son would recall decades later. At home, he could seem like a normal father. But once he put on the uniform, he became something else. From the windows of the SS area, one can see yards where naked prisoners are sprayed with ice-cold water in the dead of winter until they collapse. Many die on the spot. Others die in the following days from pneumonia. For the Nazi apparatus, Mauthausen and Gusen are not only places of punishment or the elimination of enemies. They are also production centers integrated into the war economy. The extracted granite blocks supply construction projects across Europe. At the same time, the region fills with specialized sub-camps devoted to different kinds of work. From 1942 onward, the intensifying Allied bombing forces the Reich to move much of its armaments industry underground. It is there that the Mauthausen Gusen system takes on a new role. Near the village of St. Gorgen, a few kilometers from Gusen, a colossal project begins. In a discreet forest, far from outside eyes, thousands of prisoners dig tunnels dozens of meters below the surface. The complex is given the code name Berg Kristall, Mountain Crystal. Over months of uninterrupted labor, the deportees carve galleries, lay rails, and pour concrete for walls and ceilings. Many die crushed in cave-ins, exhausted by the work or sickened by dust and damp. In those galleries, one of the Third Reich's most important underground factories is installed. There, fuselages for the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter are assembled, considered the world's first operational jet fighter. Most components arrive by train. Prisoners unload them and carry them to the assembly lines. It is estimated that a large share of all Me-262 fuselages produced during the war passed through these galleries, built and maintained by enslaved hands. The project represents the extreme union of high-technology warfare and the exploitation of deportees. Another branch of the system turns to a different weapon, the V-2 missile, the first long-range ballistic projectile developed by Germany. In the town of Redl-Zipf, using a former brewery with underground cellars, the SS create a satellite camp and a hidden testing center. Prisoners enlarge existing caverns and drill a vertical shaft several dozen meters deep, linking the galleries to a bunker camouflaged in the forest. Missile engines arrive by train, are unloaded in the dim tunnels, and moved by elevator to the surface. From there, they are carried along rails to the test bunker, where they are mounted on a metal structure. Ignition tests are carried out with the propulsion section aimed at a concrete trench designed to withstand the flame. Each test consumes enormous amounts of fuel and, above all, human lives. Work in that enclosed, deafening environment saturated with toxic gases causes constant accidents and illness. The sub-camp's death lists grow week after week. Those who can no longer work in the quarry, in the tunnels, or in the underground factories are not sent back home. The system has a specific destination prepared for them. About 35 kilometers west of Mauthausen, near the small town of Alkoven, stands Hartheim Castle. Before the war, the building was converted into a center for the T4 euthanasia program, in which people with physical or intellectual disabilities considered lives unworthy of life were murdered. When the program is reorganized in 1941, Hartheim's facilities are adapted to a new function. Under the code name Action 14F13, it becomes the extermination center for sick or incapacitated prisoners from several concentration camps: Dachau, Ravensbrück, Gusen, and Mauthausen, among others. Deportees selected for Hartheim travel in sealed trucks or special rail cars. Officially, they are transfers to hospitals or sanatoriums. In reality, none of them returns. Hartheim's staff are the same people who have spent years perfecting the technique of rapid, silent killing. Prisoners arrive, are registered, made to pass through a room where a medical examination is staged, and shortly afterward, enter a camouflaged gas chamber. Within a few hours, the operation is complete. Murder, removal of valuables, cremation, disposal of ashes. There are no long-term cells, no barracks. Hartheim is a terminal station. At the end of the war, the SS also try to erase that trail. Facilities are destroyed, ovens dismantled, chimneys sealed. Even so, traces remain in the ground. fragments of bones, personal objects, the registration numbers of some prisoners. Decades later, excavations and archival work would make it possible to link metal tags recovered there to the records of Mauthausen and Gusen, restoring a name to some of the victims. While the system operates at full capacity, Germany's situation at the front deteriorates. From 1944 onward, bombing raids, the advance of the Red Army, and Allied offensives in the West turned the Austrian camps into the final destination for columns of prisoners evacuated from elsewhere. Trains arrive more packed, death marches often end at Mauthausen. Overcrowding multiplies, and conditions already extreme become unbearable. In February 1945, one of the most singular episodes in the camp's history occurs. In Block 20 of Mauthausen, several hundred Red Army officers are held. They are isolated from the rest, subjected to a regime of systematic starvation. They know their chances of survival are minimal. Little by little, a group devises an escape plan. It is not an attempt to flee toward long-term freedom. Most understand the odds are against them. It is about choosing the circumstances of their own death. On a night of bitter cold, the officers soak blankets and clothing with water and hang them over the electrified wire. When the fabric freezes, it forms a partial insulating layer. At a prearranged signal, they hurl themselves at the fence, break the current, tear down the wire, and surge outward. In the process, they kill several capos and guards. It is estimated that more than 400 manage to get outside the compound. The reaction is immediate. The camp commandant mobilizes every available force: SS, police, party members, local volunteers. A manhunt is organized that lasts for days. The operation is given a cynical name: the Mühlviertel Hare Hunt. Armed groups sweep through villages and forests, track footprints in the snow, shoot at any figure that looks like a fugitive. Many residents participate actively, others look the other way. Only a small minority dare to help. On a farm near the village of Schwertberg, a 14-year-old girl named Anna lives with her family. It is Sunday. Her mother is preparing to go to Mass when there is a knock at the barn door. Outside stand two men in prisoner clothing. Striped trousers, thin jackets, feet wrapped in rags, no shoes. They can barely form words in German, but their gesture is clear. They are asking for food. The mother immediately understands where they have come from. Despite the danger of summary execution for helping fugitives, she decides to hide them. She feeds them, conceals them in a hollow beneath the hayloft. And when SS patrols search the area, she feigns ignorance. The two men spend weeks, then months, hidden there, coming out only at night to stretch their muscles. At the end of the war, when US troops reach the region, they manage to present themselves to them as survivors. Years later, they would say they had chosen that house after seeing a wooden cross beside the barn. They thought that anyone willing to place that symbol there might also be willing to offer refuge. Of the hundreds of Soviet officers who attempt to escape that night, barely a dozen survive until the end of the conflict. Their testimonies, along with the rescue documents, show just how completely Mauthausen had become a place without horizon. In the last months, mortality reaches extreme levels. Trains keep arriving with deportees from evacuated camps in the east and the west. Many die already in the rail cars. Those who reach the roll call yard can barely remain standing. The crematoria cannot keep up. Mass graves are opened and bodies are piled outside the barracks. As the front draws near, the SS begin to abandon the camp, leaving the machinery of death half paralyzed and thousands of prisoners with almost no food or medical care. It is in that context that in early May 1945, U.S. forces approach Mauthausen. The soldiers advance along a narrow road flanked by stone walls and fields still churned into mud by the thaw. They do not know exactly what they will find. They have heard rumors of concentration camps. They have already seen other places. But among prisoners, Mauthausen has a reputation as one of the worst in the system. As they cross the entrance, they encounter a multitude of starving figures trying to line up, to salute, to show in some way that they are still alive. Many still wear the striped uniform. Others have covered themselves with blankets, scraps of cloth, coats taken from the warehouse of confiscated clothing. The soldiers hand out rations and bring trucks of supplies, but they soon understand that any poorly calculated gesture can kill. Prisoners' bodies cannot withstand large amounts of food all at once. In more than one camp, prisoners have died from eating too quickly after liberation. Within days, the entire Mauthausen-Gusen system collapses. The subcamps are occupied one after another. In Gusen, the Americans arrive, while the remnants of the last cremations still smolder. In the Bergkristall tunnels, they find fuselage remains, rails, abandoned machinery. In Redl-Zipf, they discover the galleries used for missile engine tests. In Hartheim, Allied investigators find a partially dismantled building with visible traces of its earlier activity. In the years that follow, parts of those places will be demolished, repurposed, or simply allowed to fade into oblivion. Gusen, in particular, will almost completely vanish from the visible landscape. Its barracks become homes, its parade ground turns into a street. The quarry ceases to be worked. For a long time, many visitors to Mauthausen will not even realize that a second camp of similar size existed just a few kilometers away. Mauthausen, by contrast, remains a stone fortress on the hilltop. Its walls, watchtowers, entrance gate, and part of the barracks still stand. Over the years, they become a memorial and museum. Archives such as the negatives rescued by prisoners from the photo lab, the tunnel blueprints, the records from Hartheim Castle, and survivors' testimonies make it possible to reconstruct, piece by piece, how that system functioned. Between 1938 and 1945, the Mauthausen complex exploited nearly 200,000 people from across Europe. Around 120,000 lost their lives in the quarry, in the barracks, in the bunker, in the tunnels, in Hartheim, on death marches, or in so-called selection operations. The numbers convey the scale, but not the daily experience of those who, day after day, climbed the steps of the stairway of death, counted the hours on the parade ground, or waited for the call for a transport whose true destination was never explained to them. Beyond the physical structure and the network of subcamps, the Mauthausen system rested on a strict classification of prisoners. Each deportee wore sewn onto his chest and leg a colored triangle indicating the reason for incarceration. Red for political prisoners, green for common criminals, purple for Jehovah's Witnesses, pink for men persecuted for their sexual orientation, black and brown for those the authorities called asocial, yellow stars for Jews. Sometimes several triangles overlap to form a Star of David, marking a double status. Spanish Republicans deported after the defeat of 1939 wore a blue triangle with an S. For the SS, all these symbols served as a quick map of the hierarchy of power and of each body's usefulness within the camp. Internal organization also relied on prisoners elevated to positions of partial authority, the so-called kapos. They were the ones who ran work details, delivered blows, enforced pace, and carried out orders. Some tried to protect their comrades within the narrow margins they had. Others became executioners, as feared as the SS themselves. Deportees' daily experience was shaped by that ambiguity. To survive, they depended on men who, in turn, could stay alive only by obeying those who dominated them. A typical day in Mauthausen begins before dawn. Long before the first light appears, a siren or the shouts of kapos force everyone to get up. There is no time to stretch or for any private gesture. Within minutes, hundreds of men must wash as best they can at collective sinks, dress in damp, tattered clothing, and form perfect lines in front of the barracks. Morning coffee is nothing more than a bitter ersatz drink, ladled out from metal buckets. For many, that hot liquid is the only defense against the cold that seeps into the bones. After the first roll call comes the march to the work sites. Those assigned to the quarry descend in tight columns, flanked by guards with rifles and dogs. Others head to workshops, warehouses, kitchens, construction sites inside the compound or in the surrounding area. The idea of useful work does not prevent many tasks from being deliberately designed as punishment. Moving stones from one place to another for no apparent reason, digging trenches that are later refilled, pushing wheelbarrows far heavier than an exhausted person can bear. In the quarry, the noise of pneumatic hammers, controlled blasts, and shouting creates a constant soundtrack. Dust works its way into the lungs, damp keeps the skin perpetually cold. Muscles ache from the first step to the last. Capos often choose the weakest prisoners for the heaviest loads, knowing it is almost a death sentence. The goal is not only to extract stone, it is to break bodies and willpower. The midday break is brief and is far from rest. At best, it is a watery soup handed out at the work site itself. Anyone who takes a few extra seconds to drink it can lose it if a guard orders an immediate return to the task. Pulling out a whole potato from the cauldron can be considered a privilege. Stealing a second portion is an offense that can be paid for with one's life. At the end of the day, prisoners return to the camp dragging their feet. Another roll call awaits them on the parade ground. If someone is missing, everyone must remain standing, motionless, until the body is found. In winter, the wait can stretch on for hours beneath the snow. There are nights when dozens of men die frozen in perfect ranks without moving from the spot assigned to them. Only then does dinner come, as scarce as the midday meal, followed by a brief period of rest in the overcrowded barracks. At night, sleep is never complete. Bodies jostle, bunks creak, someone coughs without stopping. Someone else has a fever and raves. Another gets up to go to the latrines and loses his place when he returns. Outside, searchlights sweep the fences again and again. From time to time, a gunshot, a bark, a brief scream rings out. It is a sign that someone has come too close to the wire, or that a guard has decided, without any apparent reason, to remind everyone who is in charge. Beyond physical labor and constant terror, Mauthausen is also a place of administrative experimentation. The SS test different forms of record keeping, movement control, body classification, and task assignment. Each prisoner exists in the files as a number tied to a colored triangle, a work detail, and a series of notes. Fit, unfit, sick, dangerous, suspect, transferable. When a transport to Hartheim, to another subcamp, or to a mass execution is ordered, the lists can be drawn up in minutes. Dogs are part of that system as surely as the forms. They appear again and again in survivors' accounts. Large animals trained to attack without hesitation accompany guards on patrols and at formations. Sometimes they are set upon a prisoner as punishment, sometimes for amusement. In the quarry, A few barks are enough to make an entire group quicken its pace to the edge of its strength. Violence is not always carried out openly. Often it takes subtler forms, yet just as devastating. Pointless labor, unpredictable rule changes, carefully planted rumors about transfers or executions. In the quarantine block, for example, newcomers never know how many days they will remain there or what awaits them afterward. Any attempt to plan beyond a few hours becomes a luxury. Uncertainty combined with material hardship is another tool to destroy the capacity to resist. In the midst of that environment, some prisoners try to preserve fragments of their former lives. Spaniards organize small networks of mutual support, share news from outside, mentally retrace streets of Barcelona, Madrid, or Bilbao so as not to forget their shape. Jews from Poland or Holland trade words in Yiddish or Dutch. Austrian, Czech, or German political prisoners recall clandestine debates from before the war. Sometimes, in a corner of the barracks, someone sings very softly a familiar melody. Those tiny acts do not change the camp structure, but they allow some to endure one more day. The photographs rescued from the lab show only flashes of that world. In them, one sees work details that seem calm, prisoners who appear to walk without supervision, SS cadres posing in their best uniforms. Everything else is missing. Bodies collapsed outside the frame, faces swollen by hunger, corpses piled against the wall. And yet, even those incomplete images make it possible to reconstruct the place's logic. By comparing them with testimonies and with plans found later, one can place each corner, each building, each fence in its real context. When Francisco Boy testifies after the war, he explains that the photos are not just administrative documents. They are fragments of a truth that, without them, could have been denied more easily. In the trials, images are shown of official visits, of Himmler walking through the quarry, of senior commanders touring the camp without seeing, or without wanting to see, the suffering around them. The same stones that today form part of the memorial appear then as the backdrop to a performance in which the perpetrators feel secure in their impunity. Mauthausen does not cease functioning as a center of exploitation and death until the final days of the Third Reich. Even when military defeat is imminent, trains keep arriving, lists are updated. Prisoners are selected for work details or for special treatment. The rhythm breaks only when the SS abandon the camp, and the structure they created is left for a few hours without a visible master. In that brief interval, some prisoners take initiatives that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Some organize to maintain a minimum of order so that the weakest are not crushed in stampedes toward the food warehouses. Others search for documentation, lists, evidence that might one day help explain what happened. In the barracks, there are still unburied dead. In the bunker's basements, there are recent remnants on the dissection tables. In the quarry, the staircase is stained with dried blood. The arrival of Allied soldiers does not erase any of it. It simply freezes the scene and begins another phase, the attempt to understand. For many of the liberated, that understanding will never be complete. They leave the camp with weakened bodies and images that will not leave their memory. Some will write books, others will testify in court, others will remain silent for decades. Among them are Spaniards who return to an exile that continues, Czechs who go back to a homeland occupied by another power, Jews who have lost almost their entire families, Austrians and Germans who must confront societies where many prefer not to speak of what occurred. The history of Mauthausen does not end with the opening of its gates. It continues in the way its survivors and its neighbors remember, or silence what they lived through. Seen from a distance, Mauthausen may appear as an extreme case within the vast Nazi camp system. But precisely for that reason, it allows one to see clearly the elements that recur elsewhere. The combination of economic calculation and absolute contempt for life. The integration of murder into administrative routine. The coexistence of advanced technology and archaic brutality. The granite hill, the quarries, the tunnels, Hartheim Castle, and the network of sub-camps show how an apparently ordinary landscape can be transformed within a few years into a space devoted almost entirely to the destruction of human beings. Today, those who walk through the Mauthausen fortress can cross the parade ground, enter the reconstructed barracks, look out over the quarry, and descend a few steps of the old staircase. Every corner of that compound preserves the trace of those who passed through it in silence.